You wake up, and the first thing you see is time. 6:48 a.m. The numbers are small, quiet, almost innocent, but they already control everything. You measure your entire existence by these digits. You eat when they tell you to. You stop when they say enough. You rush, wait, sleep, hustle, all for the ticking of something you didn't invent, but obey without question. We think of time as neutral, but it isn't. Time, as we know it, is discipline. It's structure. It's efficiency. It's control. The clock isn't just a tool. It's a silent supervisor. It doesn't yell. It doesn't punish. It just stares back and reminds you that you're always late for something, that there's never enough, that now is only a vehicle toward next. And we follow, even when we don't need to, even on weekends, even on vacation. We check the time to see if we're being good, if we're maximizing, optimizing, achieving. And all the while, life slips past, neatly chopped into hours, half hours, 5-minute chunks. But real life doesn't move in minutes. It moves in moments, in breath, in sensation, in presence. We've confused order with truth. We've mistaken the measurement of time for the experience of being alive. This was the lie I didn't know I was living. Until one day I asked, what happens if I remove the clock? What happens if I stop looking at time altogether? Will I fall apart? Or will I find something I've forgotten? What began as a simple experiment, a few days without a clock, turned into something else. A shift, a disorientation, and eventually, a kind of awakening. But in the beginning, it was only fear. Because the truth is, we don't just use the clock. We hide behind it. It tells us when to feel hungry, when to rest, when to speak, when to stop. Without it, we are naked. We have no frame to hold on to, no external authority to blame for our discomfort. And that's where it begins, the unraveling. Because the moment you stop checking the time, you begin to feel time, not as a number, but as a weight, as a pressure, as a silent contract you never signed, but one you've been living under your whole life. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. You start to wonder, whose rhythm have I been following? What would it mean to follow my own? And what would I hear if the ticking finally stopped? The first thing you notice is silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of certainty. No numbers, no morning alarm, no mental countdown to the next obligation. You wake up whenever your body decides to. You eat when your stomach speaks, not when the clock grants permission. You pause, but don't know if it's too long. And something strange happens. You feel lost. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you no longer know when to do it. The day becomes a landscape with no markers, no trail, no schedule, no shape. At first, it's peaceful, then it's terrifying. Because your mind doesn't know how to navigate without time. It gets restless, it panics. It asks, is this enough? Am I wasting the day? Should I be doing something right now? You've lived your entire life inside a system. You never questioned it. You were praised for being on time. You measured self-worth in productivity, punctuality, precision. And now, none of it applies. So your mind rebels. It reaches for ghosts. You catch yourself glancing at your wrist, even when there's no watch. You check your phone, out of habit, not need. You ask others for the time, pretending it's for convenience when it's really for reassurance. But this discomfort is the beginning of something real. Because when the scaffolding falls, you meet yourself. Not the version that exists between 9 and 5. Not the one defined by alerts, meetings, appointments, or notifications, but the one who exists beneath the schedule. And that self doesn't move quickly. That self doesn't care about optimization. That self doesn't know what time it is. It only knows how it feels. The first days without time are like standing barefoot on unfamiliar ground. You hesitate, you wobble, you question every step. But slowly, something shifts. Your body becomes louder. Your breath becomes slower. You begin to notice light, shadow, hunger, energy, not as things to manage, but to listen to. Because when the voice of the clock fades, another voice rises, one that was always there, but buried beneath the ticking. And it says something unexpected. You've never actually lived your own rhythm. You've lived the world's, the factory rhythm, the school rhythm, the market rhythm, but never yours. And once you taste what it's like to wake, eat, walk, and rest by instinct, even if awkwardly you start to feel something return. A kind of memory of what it was like before you learned to live by numbers, before you gave away your authority to the machine. It's not perfect. It's not always pleasant, but it's yours. And that is the most unfamiliar feeling of all. Without a clock, time stops behaving. It stretches, contracts, vanishes, returns. One moment, an hour feels like a lifetime long, rich, slow. Another moment, 3 hours dissolve in the blink of a thought. You begin to realize time was never linear. Only the measurement of time is. And when you remove the tool of measurement, you're left not with numbers, but experience. You start to notice that the passing of time depends entirely on the quality of your attention. When you're present, truly present, time thickens. Every detail expands. The texture of your surroundings, the sound of footsteps, the way sunlight shifts across the floor. Time becomes deep. But when your attention fragments, when your mind jumps between thoughts, tasks, distractions, time thins, it races, it escapes, and you look up, wondering where it all went. You don't feel tired because the day was long. You feel tired because you weren't in it. Without clocks, you return to the rhythm of the body, and the body doesn't move in hours. It moves in pulses, in waves, in cycles that don't begin and end neatly. You eat when you're hungry. You rest when you're heavy. You move when there's fire, and you stop when there's stillness. It's not chaotic. It's natural, but it takes time to trust it. Because we've been trained to believe that structure equals meaning, that plans equal purpose, that schedules equal success. But sometimes, the most meaningful thing you can do is sit in a moment that has no defined length. To talk until the conversation ends on its own, not when the clock says so. To walk until your feet, not your calendar, ask you to return. To work until you're finished, not until the timer rings. Without time dictating your path, you begin to feel something strange. Freedom. But not the kind sold to you in productivity hacks and vacation ads. A deeper freedom. The freedom to experience time as alive, not a straight road, but a landscape. A forest where some paths twist, where some spaces expand, where some moments echo endlessly, and others pass like wind. And then comes the strangest realization of all. Maybe you were the one making time feel like a cage. Maybe time was never rigid, only your perception of it was. And now, without the lines, you're not lost. You're here, for the first time in years. When you stop watching the clock, you start watching your life. At first, it's disorienting. The days blur, the usual markers disappear. But then, something unexpected begins to happen. You start to notice things. Not big things, small ones. The way light changes in the afternoon. The difference in your breath before and after a walk. The way your fingers tremble slightly before you're truly rested. You become aware not of time, but of now. This is presence, not as a concept, but as a physical return. You begin to taste food again, not with distraction, but with awareness. You feel hunger arise and pass like a tide, not as a number on a schedule. You go outside and don't think, I'll walk for 20 minutes. You walk until something in you says stop. Without time hovering over your head, there is space. Space between moments. Space inside your thoughts. Space for life to breathe again. You begin to move slower, not because you're lazy, but because there's no reason to rush. You begin to speak slower, not because you're uncertain, but because your words aren't racing a deadline. And people notice. They lean in, because presence is magnetic, rare. It feels like safety in a world of noise. You look others in the eye longer. You actually hear them, not just their words, but their pauses, their silences, their struggle to find words. And in that, something profound occurs. You realize that most of life is missed, not because we're busy, but because we're not here. We've trained ourselves to be elsewhere, to plan while eating, to scroll while walking, to check the time in the middle of joy, as if joy has a limit. But when the numbers vanish, you return. Not to some idealized self, but to the version of you that's not measured. Not the productive one, not the on-schedule one, just the present one. And this presence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives like the sound of a breeze through an open window, like a moment where everything feels aligned for no reason you can explain. And you begin to wonder, how much of my life have I missed because I was too busy managing it? How many sacred, ordinary moments have I reduced to 5 minutes left, or I'm late, or I should be somewhere else? You start to feel time again, not as urgency, but as rhythm. And in that rhythm, you find something deeper than structure. You find trust. Trust in your body. Trust in your attention. Trust that when you are present, you don't need a clock to tell you what matters. Because what matters is always here and has been waiting for you to notice. Schedules promise order, but they often deliver anxiety. They're sold to us as the path to success, focus, productivity. Wake up at 6, meditate at 6:15, read for 30 minutes, work in blocks, rest in windows, sleep by 11. It sounds clean, precise, disciplined. But somewhere along the way, you forget how to listen to yourself. Because no schedule, no matter how optimized, knows what your body feels at 2:07 p.m. It doesn't know that today you woke with grief in your chest, or that your mind needs stillness before creation, or that a single walk outside might bring more clarity than 2 hours of deep work. When I stopped using the clock, the schedule began to dissolve. Not all at once, not violently, but like old scaffolding slowly taken down after the structure beneath it had grown strong enough to stand. At first, there was panic. What if I forget something? What if I become unproductive? What if my day collapses? But something else happened. I began to move according to energy, not expectation, not when the world said it was time to work, but when the internal light turned on, not when the clock said it was lunch, but when my body whispered hunger, not when the schedule said rest, but when my spirit fell quiet. And productivity didn't die, it changed. It stopped being a race. It became a flow. Less output but deeper. Less control but more clarity. You realize that most of what passes for productivity is just fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing your place in a system that never actually loved you. And when that fear softens, you find something better than performance, presence. The to-do list no longer rules. You remember what it feels like to choose what you do, not just check boxes to feel worthy. You start doing less, but everything you do is alive. You're no longer fitting life into blocks. You're letting life expand into breath. And slowly, something radical becomes clear. The schedule was never about time. It was about control. A way to hold on to certainty, to avoid chaos, to stay within the lines. But life is not a grid. It's not a plan. It's a pulse. And when you live from the pulse, you don't get more done. You become more real. You let go of what doesn't need to happen. You say no without guilt. You rest when it's right, not when it's allowed. And in that, the question shifts from, what should I be doing now, to what's asking to move through me now. That is not inefficiency. That is intimacy. The kind that no planner can create. The kind that no clock can measure. The kind that only arrives when the schedule dies. We're taught to think of time as objective, exact, mechanical, impartial. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 24 hours, a structure carved into stone, universal and unchanging. But when you remove the clock, something strange begins to happen. Time begins to feel. It breathes, it pulses, it responds. Some mornings are wide and endless. Others vanish in what feels like moments. Some afternoons feel like whole lifetimes. Others pass through your hands like water. And you begin to wonder, if time is constant, why does it feel so different every day? Because the truth is, time isn't just a number. It's a sensation. It stretches when you're in flow. It collapses when you're in crisis. It disappears in love. It freezes in pain. It loops in memory. It bends in dream. The clock may measure time, but it doesn't explain it. Just as a ruler can measure a canvas, but cannot tell you what the painting means. You start to feel the subtle ways in which time is emotional, spiritual, psychological. And when you stop imposing numbers onto your day, you begin to live time, not count it. You feel the rising of energy without calling it morning. You feel the settling of the heart without needing evening. You feel the quiet in your bones and know it's time to stop. Not because it's 9 p.m., but because something inside you says, enough for today. You realize that you've been negotiating with time like it was a taskmaster, but in truth, it's a partner. One that flows differently through each moment, each conversation, each creative act. And if you listen closely, you begin to understand. You don't manage time, you dance with it. You don't conquer it, you learn its rhythm. And most of all, you stop fearing it. Because it's not running out, it's not against you, it's not an enemy. It's an echo of how deeply you are present. It mirrors your breath, your intention, your capacity to be here now fully. And when you start to live like that, you no longer ask, how much time do I have? You ask, how deeply can I feel the time I'm already in? That question changes everything. The clock is back on my wall. My phone lights up with the hour. The calendar fills. The minutes tick forward. The days unfold. But something is different now. Not in the world, in me. Because once you've lived without time, you never fully return to it. You still use it, but you don't worship it. You still schedule, but you don't obey. You glance at the clock, but you no longer bow. You understand it now for what it is. A tool, not a truth. A frame, not the picture itself. A measurement, not the meaning. You know that time can help you, but it can also steal from you. Steal your presence. Steal your instinct. Steal your life in tiny increments that feel logical until they're gone. And what you reclaim once you've seen through it is sacred. You reclaim slow. You reclaim silence. You reclaim the space between things, the invisible hours where the soul actually breathes. You stop rushing through joy. You stop compressing your rest. You stop racing to the next thing without asking if the current thing ever truly ended. You begin to trust your felt time. You feel your rhythms without apology. You say no without guilt. You rest in the middle of the day if it's what the moment asks for. Because now you know, time doesn't just exist on clocks. It exists in the body, in the breath, in the heart, and it whispers its own rhythm if you're still enough to hear it. This experience changed me, not in how I plan my days, but in how I inhabit them. I don't chase time now, I meet it. Like an old friend I used to misunderstand. Like a song I now move to not count. I look at the clock sometimes, but now I also look at the sky, at the way light shifts through windows, at the feeling in my chest when I need to begin or end something. And that feeling, that instinct, that presence, it was buried under the ticking, but it's always been mine. And now I know, time is not something I serve, it's something I live, and I will never see it the same again.